system, Saturn was the highest planet in the seven
So I've
system.
I've been asked, how do we count? How do we adjust things with the addition of the new planets?
Well, they've been in play for a very long time. So Uranus was 1700s, around the time of the American Revolution, and it's been equated with that kind of energy: independence, freedom, unexpected events. Neptune is more 1700s, I think.
Yeah. Well, they were all during the Enlightenment, weren't they?
Nope. Pluto's 1930,
Yeah. Well, of course,
and
Pluto.
then
Pluto's not even a planet, though.
Pluto was a planet, now is a dwarf planet. Still has impact. It's a dwarf planet, not a full planet. And Pluto is the one that whose transit is causing all the problems globally right now. The pandemic and the wars are coming from Pluto going through the 10th house of the executive branch of life, and then going into the Aquarian, which is groups, and sort of the executive branch morphs into the Aquarian groups and humanitarian issues, humanity, friends, how we think. And it has, as I've mentioned before, a very dogmatic, rigid aspect to it, kind of, which is being demonstrated by the that's Aquarius has two rulers. It has Saturn and it has Uranus, so it has both aspects. So what happened when these new planets were discovered? The more recent ones were finally visible because of the telescopes that were available. Is that astrologers tracked their impact once they were identified and have assigned them to planets. Astrologers have different opinions about it because, like any discipline, it's not a hard science. So Neptune was assigned to Pisces, and so Pisces is ruled by Jupiter and Neptune. Pluto was assigned to Scorpio, and so Scorpio is ruled by Aries and Pluto, and Uranus was assigned to Aquarius, so it's ruled by Saturn and Uranus.
In your opinion, in your experience, has do the newer planets play a greater role for signs like Aquarius, for example, with Uranus over Saturn, or how do you find that the dynamic of that relationship of the newer rulerships contrasting with the old?
Well, it's a bit of a juggling act when you're interpreting. You're going to, if you ascribe to dual rulerships, which a lot of modern astrologers do, and so we're using the tropical system for this. Some siderealists will use the outer planets. The thing about them is they have a very slow transit, and as such, they have more of a generational influence rather than a specific personal influence. So the original seven planets, starting Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, um, Jupiter, Saturn, those ones have more of are more descriptive of the personality, the journey of the personality. The three outer planets, which is generally how they're referred to, not the new ones, but the outer, they have very slow transits. And so you'll find people of a generation being reflected in the kinds of attitudes and the significance of a specific generation. So my generation, Pluto and Leo, were the boomers. So that's sort of our signature. Neptune in Libra, and Uranus in Gemini. So around the time I was born. So when you're reading someone's chart, you're going to look at does it tie into the personal planet? So if you're looking, let's just take an example. If you're looking at Uranus in someone's chart, first of all, you're going to see what generation are they part of. So because everyone's part of a generation, and every generation, you can even see how people call them Gen X, Gen Z, millennials. People recognize that groups of people sort of come in around a certain time, and they have a certain agenda. They have certain gifts to offer, they have certain challenges to face, and in my opinion, every generation is there to move things along from the previous generation. So, if you sometimes see people wanting to beat up on boomers because they think they didn't do what the Gen X or Gen Z or millennials think they should have, but they weren't there at the time. And so the boomers were reacting to the war and the 50s, which came out of all of that. The next generation over has very different influences that they're reacting to.
Let us not forget the boomers include the beatniks and the hippies.
Yes, the 50s would be the 8 people who were adults in the 50s. The hippies were the people who were adults, young adults, and then adults in the late 60s, 70s. And that's that is the Neptune influence. That's why drugs became an issue, and a complete
Neptune.
a complete revolution in terms of relationships. The regimented Stepfordness of the 50s male-female relationships, which was a response to the absolute terror and chaos of the 30s and then the 40s. So a depression, then a war. So devastating to the psyche of that generation. All they wanted was security. Let's get everything stabilized. That's what the adults in the 50s were doing. So what the kids of the 50s were doing, which is the boomer generation, they were going, oh my God, this is so false. These people are coming home having martinis and they're miserable as hell because they're not honest. No one's telling the truth and no one's got a real relationship. So they grew up and wanted, with Neptune in Libra, to have honest relationships. So they didn't care so much about marriage. And once birth control came in, women didn't have to be married in order to have sexual relations. So that changed everything. So when you're doing a personal chart, you're looking at what generation is this person in, as far as Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are concerned. They're part of those 3 features of their generation, and that says a lot about what influences they have. You want to see what house they're in. You really want to see if they impact any of the personal planets. My experience has been that people who have the outer planets impacting one of the inner planets have much more tumultuous lives. They have enormous depth of perception and understanding because they've got the generational harbinger right there in their face, in their psyche, in their heart, their mind, their soul. And so they can either become sort of examples of the generation if they have any kind of public planetary placements. If they're all personal in the lower part of the chart, or just very, very deeply personal, then they'll go through enormous transformations and changes and upheavals in their personal life, and they just don't lead an A to B to C complacent, easy life. And I put easy in quotes because people who have an easy life don't always think that it's easy, but people who are struggling to a different degree perceive other people's lives as easy. So, if you've got a disability, someone who can walk is perceived as being damn lucky and shouldn't have anything to complain about. Or someone who has no money, looking at someone who's been gifted with all sorts of material benefits. The person who's been